But moving on, we talk about TNA and their WrestleMania. That's what they call Bound for Glory. That's their big event every single year. It's their 20th Bound for Glory. It's crazy to think they're still kicking. They're still around. Bound for Glory this week from Detroit, or the greater Detroit area, Wayne State University. And, I will say one thing about Bound for Glory. It's a weird event. I've gone to it twice randomly, not like WrestleMania. It's not really been a big destination, but just happened to be local in weird places like Albany, New York, of all. But, I know that they market it internally as their biggest event of the year, but I don't really feel, even from their perspective, that it's always their biggest event of the year. It doesn't always feel really that much different. It doesn't feel like, I can see, it doesn't feel like AEW with All In at Wembley Stadium, right? That looks different than all the other shows they put on, and you're like, okay, I get this. This looks like a big event. I understand. But Bound for Glory sometimes, like I said, Albany, New York, and I understand they're not going to maybe draw 20,000 people to Bound for Glory, but you can at least go to namesake cities, right? You can go to New York City, Los Angeles, Chicago, like these kind of cities to run the event, even if it's a small building within those major cities. You know what I mean? Even if you're not running O2 Arena, London itself is a major city. But Bound for Glory has got that kind of history where, like I said, they've run their shows out of Ottawa. They've run their shows out of Albany. They've run their shows out of, I think, Windsor, Ontario one year. So it's kind of strange in that regard and how they present it. And a couple of those years, the first couple, were out of the impact zone in Orlando. So talk about not really feeling any different. You're literally recording it from the same place you record your weekly TV shows. But this week, it is they're Bound for Glory. And as we were talking off air, if you're just a casual wrestling fan, more people have participated in this show on a past WrestleMania card or AEW All-In card than have probably at the event we'll talk about in a little bit, NXT Halloween Havoc, because, while there's a lot of newcomers on this show, this is for fans of this feels like the AAA baseball team in Major League Baseball. Like, it's the names you recognize that are just on the cusp of the WWE, but they're not in the developmental stage. They're on what we saw Cody Rhodes years ago or Drew McIntyre years ago. They're on the refining themselves stage. And Dolph Ziggler, now known as Nick Nemeth, which is one of more of his real names, is doing that as he takes on Joe Hendry for the TNA World Championship with Frankie Kazarian as the special guest referee. What do you make, and I don't know if you followed it too closely, of Dolph Ziggler / Nick Nemeth kind of doing what those other guys did? I mean, he's showing up at a lot of indie shows as I guess what he's calling himself, a most wanted man, and kind of redeveloping himself. Are you a fan of this? Should he just be treating himself like he was Dolph Ziggler and going off of that gimmick, or do you like to see him redefining himself against Joe Hendry, a man who clearly we could easily be seeing in the Royal Rumble in just a few months?
Yeah, I mean, we'll start. I'll start with Joe Hendry. I mean, that guy, he was like an extra essentially, a handful of years back, and now he's reinvented himself. He's made himself into something that everybody knows, even if you're not a wrestling fan. Even we've talked about it before, baseball teams are, they're mentioning Joe Hendry. So this is a matchup of two guys that I think it's cool that they're both redefining themselves. And going to Nick Nemeth, I mean, yeah, Dolph Ziggler had his run, but I think with Dolph, I think he hit his ceiling as Dolph Ziggler, and that's why he left, because he knew he wasn't going to break through any further than what he was at that point. So redefining himself and doing maybe the Drew McIntyre or the Cody Rhodes route, it's certainly possible. I mean, he's not, in wrestling terms, he's still got some good years left in him. He's got some tread left on the tires. So, depending on how things go in the next year or two, I don't know what his contract looks like, to be honest, but maybe he does circle back and go to WWE and make one final run. But right now, I think he's in a good place in his career, and this matchup between him and Hendry, I think it'll be an interesting one.
I think that feels like a worthy of a real big main event, I guess, in this terms. Not WrestleMania or something like that, but in terms of if we're comparing this to NXT, yes, this feels like a main event I want to watch, right? Recognizable faces, some people who are some of the biggest names in the industry right now, like a Kenny Omega was years ago, where you knew about him and he was selling his shirt at Spencer's and Hot Topic, despite the fact that he never stepped foot in the WWE. And another guy that's been doing that for a couple of years now, and I don't know if he really would ever want to go back, but Maybe he would. Matt Cardona, he takes on PCO in a Monsters Ball match. And one thing I like about Matt Cardona recently, or at least since he's been out of WWE, is indeed he likes to get involved in this stuff. He's in GCW, the death match god, he calls himself. So he's really reinventing himself from this like babyface, oiled up, low mid card guy who can win the IC title in the PG era of WWE to going through, flaming tables and doing stuff like that. And I think, I respect him for it because, like I said, a lot of people could come from WWE and show up at a indie show and be like, I'm not going to take bumps. I'm just going to sign autographs. You should be happy to see me. But he puts in the work. And his wife, is a main lady on WWE, and he doesn't let that stop him from putting in his own work, in TNA and in GCW and these other places. So I respect him for that. PCO, you obviously respect him for that because clearly that guy was a Quebecer like decades ago, and he should be retired.
He's literally
still putting in the work.
He's literally old enough to be. He's definitely. I know we're not that far. You're a little bit older than me, but he's definitely old enough to be like my dad. You know what I mean? Like he's an old guy.
Yeah, he's 56 years old and still kicking and ready to get in a Monsters Ball match with thumbtacks and all the stuff that goes with it. Just kind of getting on a few of the matches here without going through the whole card. Jordana Grace, Masha Slamovich, they fought at Bound for Glory a few years ago in the same kind of spot. Still to this day, if not more so today than they were before, this is your future of women's wrestling, folks. I would take these two women over almost the whole AEW women's locker room, maybe minus Mercedes Moné when it comes to namesake. This is your future right here of women's wrestling. Jordana Grace, we saw her last year at the Royal Rumble, and when she came out, everybody knew exactly who she was because she is this force. She's kind of like a Jade Cargill in the sense of her physique. You know what I mean? She's kind of like a Chyna. She obviously used to be kind of like a Piper Niven. She was probably Piper Niven's build many years ago and really went to the gym and transformed her body like crazy. And Masha Slamovich is the same thing right now. She's kind of touring all over, but she is right there beside Jordana Grace as like the next big thing that's not in WWE or AEW. She is like what we think of when we think of like the Okadas and the Will Ospreays. When we think of what Will Ospreay is before he comes to AEW as this major free agent, that's what Masha Slamovich and Jordana Grace are outside of those major companies.
And by the way,
when they make those companies, people will know them.
Well, yeah. By the way, I mean they're both under 30. I mean they're both they're still in wrestling terms. They got a lot of tread on their tires. They're both going to be forces in the next decade. And this match will be pretty good. And I think Jordan Grace will win. I think if I had to pick one.
I will say one thing, like I said, when the Royal Rumble kicks around and obviously this TNA WWE tie comes around, don't be surprised if both of those people are in the Royal Rumble. And when their music hits, it's going to be a big pop because people know who they are if you're in the know in the world of wrestling. Exactly. And one final match I'll talk about, the X Division Championship. Another guy, I would say he's the new Will Ospreay. A couple of years ago, obviously, Kenny Omega was the big star, not in WWE. And then it became, Okada. Then it became like Will Ospreay. Right now, Mike Bailey, the Canadian, he is the guy who is doing exactly what I just explained with the women. He is that person who is not in WWE, but he's right outside of there, and he's making a living as a professional wrestling and traveling the world, and people knowing who he is, and me watching his matches, and me saying, boy, I can't wait until he gets to those companies, and I can see him on the higher stage in the AEWs or the NXTs. But when Mike Bailey's music hits at an AEW event and he's staring down Will Ospreay or Ricochet, it's going to be a big pop, and people aren't going to go, who's this? What's this? They're going to know, and they're going to be excited for it. I've seen Mike Bailey a few times live. I've seen him on television. I will say Mike Bailey and Will Ospreay last year at Bound for Glory put on what I thought was the wrestling match of the whole year. So I'm excited to see his match against Vikingo for the X Division Championship, and that should be a good match as well. Overall, I mean, if it was in my area, it wasn't in Detroit, I would definitely be all about this event. I think this is the wrestling event of the weekend, at least. I'm excited for it. In your opinion. In my opinion, this is a wrestling event of the weekend in comparison of Halloween Havoc. Should be a good event. I'm excited to kind of check out some of this. And if you're a casual wrestling fan, there's a lot of names, as always, in the world of TNA that you'll recognize if you're just, like I said, you don't watch the weekly show, but you want to just tune in for one night only.